New Year, everybody. This is Andre Joseph of Unfinished Business, and welcome to 2023. And as always, the main man and host of the show, Mr. Jeff Galashaw. Say hello.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to a special episode of Unfinished Business. As you might notice, we have a very special guest with us on this episode. He is one of those actors who you probably recognize all the time, even if you don't know exactly where you saw him from. But you're always like, oh, that's the guy who was in. And so, well, today we are privileged and lucky enough to talk to the esteemed and hardworking, say his name, Mr. Brent Jennings. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. And man, you really come alive, man. You didn't say a word, you know. It's like, you got come alive.
I was saving it all for the camera.
That's quite an introduction. Hard to follow that energy, man.
Don't worry. I'm energetic because I'm just so excited right now.
I'll just sit
it takes me a while since you've been, mainly contacting Andre. Like, oh, I don't know where to exactly come into this conversation. So,
I'll just be my little quiet self and let you.
Exactly. I'll wait to make my entrance.
So, Brent, we have so many questions about your long career and all the great films that you've been part of, both in the cinema, on television. But as I always like to ask everybody that comes on, what got you started? What got you the acting bug?
Wow, that's kind of a well. That'll take some time to tell. That's a long version. No, really, it's something that I wanted to do since I was in the sixth grade. And I discovered it in the sixth grade. And, I'm a senior citizen, so we're talking about a long time ago, this was like in 1963, and I was at a place, I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas, and I was in a school called Wrightsville Elementary School. And they used to do this yearly show called the Wrightsville Follies. And you had to audition for this show, and it was kind of like a, I don't want to say a minstrel show, but those old 40s type shows where they have like the Rockettes or something, and they have the girls kicking and dancing, and then on the end, they would have two guys on each end, and they were called what were they called? They would tell jokes and come out and do little things in between the musical numbers. Sing songs, maybe tell some jokes, it was kind of done like one of those old shows that they would have at the Apollo Theater or something, back in the 40s and 30s or what have you. And so I was in the sixth grade, and they had a junior high school. Sixth grade was elementary school for me at that time. It was 1 through 6 was elementary school. So the band teacher from the junior high school would come over and recruit kids who wanted to learn to play instruments for her band. And so you would get out of class and you would go and you would tell her what you wanted to play. I wanted to play, I think it was either saxophone or trumpet or something. And I went to meet with her, this woman named Mrs. Clay. And she was telling me, no, I don't need any trumpet players. I need some clarinet players. And I don't want to play the clarinet because, you had to pay extra for the classes. But she's looking at who's graduating, who she's got to fill in to keep her band, stocked with the right instruments and the right musicians in the right spots. And so we had this long discussion about that. And I didn't want to go back to class because you got out of class to go meet with her. And they were having auditions for the Wrightsville Follies. And those guys on the end were called the end men. That's what they were called. The two guys on each end of the line, this just came back to me, were called the end men. So I went, and this woman, Miss Robinson, she was auditioning students for it. And it seemed like it'd be going back to class. And so I said I wanted to audition, and I became one of the end men. And I guess what it was the first thing that I noticed that I did that people responded to, because we would rehearse in our elementary school, the first through the, say, third grade would eat in the cafeteria while the fourth and the fifth and sixth grade was still in class, but we would be rehearsing while they would be eating. So those little kids, the younger kids, they started following me around, because they were watching my performance while they were having lunch. And so when they would see me on the playground, they'd follow me around, blah, blah, blah. So I'm thinking, oh, I do this pretty good. So as we're going along, we do the show, we take it to a bigger stage. And my teacher, the director, Mrs. Robinson, she says to me, you should consider becoming an actor. You have a good speaking voice, you have good timing. So you should consider this. And I'm thinking, wow, I'm getting all of this attention for all of this stuff, and because we go to the junior high school where they have a big auditorium, and it's like going to the Apollo or something, and all the parents are out and everybody's out, it's full. It was a big hit, and I was kind of like one of the hits of the show. And you realize you had something that you were good at, that people responded to. You got that instant gratification from it, and you got an instant response from them. So I started researching acting and directing and all of that stuff. And there was this place called the News Mart on Main Street in Little Rock, Arkansas. Every Tuesday, I could go there and get a New York Times, a Sunday New York Times. And I would read about the Negro Ensemble Company, the Black Arts Movement, because at this time we're in the 60s, we're in the Civil Rights Movement, we're in the Black Arts Movement, and the two would sort of complement each other in the sense that the artists were supporting the Civil Rights Movement and doing plays about it. And so I'm learning about all of these companies, the Negro Ensemble Company, the New Lafayette Theater, the Roger Furman's Theater, New Federal Theater, and I'm looking at all of this stuff that's going on, and I'm thinking, I got to get to New York, and that's how it all started. I just started doing things in my hometown in Little Rock at the Arkansas Arts Center. By the time I was in high school, I did stuff there and took classes, and wherever I could get exposed to it, I would do so. And one thing led to another. I mean, it's just funny how, when I look back on it now, how all these pieces fell into place, because the question was, how am I going to get out of Little Rock to get to where the action is and where I need to be if I want to pursue this? And the people that come into your life that sort of, open doors for you. When I look back now, it was just like, running a gauntlet. You just go down the road and just doors just open and you go through, and the maze goes like that and comes out and wow, here I am, and that's kind of how it all happened in a way of, I kind of shorten all the details, but yeah, that's where it started at that young age when you're impressionable, and what I liked about it was it offered, is also its flaw or its challenge, and it's also the thing that's gratifying about it is that you get to start over all the time. You get new experiences. You work with different people. You go different places. And I like the fact that you didn't go to the same building, the same office every day and do the same thing and get a gold watch and go home. But at the same time, sometimes you want that security, but there's a real gratification that you get when you get something that you're like, wow, this is the reason I became an actor. I really enjoy this project and these people I'm working with. Then you understand what's been motivating you through those tough times. So that's when it all started. And I was never able to shake it. It's like once you get a taste of it, it's like you become intoxicated with it, and you always, I just couldn't shake it. I got bit by that stage bug,
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's funny how we actually connected. The audience may not know, we both went to Emerson College, different
Mm-hmm.
times, of course.
Right.
But a few years ago, yeah. I was approached a few years ago by a mutual friend of ours, Debbie Gervais Pendergrass. She was trying to put together a documentary
Yeah,
about the history of the organization Ebony, which is
right.
basically the Black organization in our school.
Mhm,
And you were one of the people that was filmed, interviewed in Los
mhm.
Angeles to talk about your time there. And
Right,
I was
right.
actually kind of surprised. Like, oh, yeah, I remember seeing this guy in all the movies. So I was kind of shocked. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to connect with you. And,
Uh-huh.
I want to ask you about what those times were like for you, because I know for me personally, when I first went to the school, I mean, I never lived in Boston, but seeing so many white faces and a little bit of an intimidation there, like you don't see too many people of your own race, and you
Right,
need to find that kind of outlet to be around people that are, get you,
right, right,
what was it
right.
like for you at that time?
Oh man, that's a good question because it really hit on uh, the kind of orientation I had to go through. I mean, within myself, it was a very different environment for me, in a lot of different ways. Coming from Little Rock, a town of maybe about 200,000 people, uh, I had integrated a school. When I went from my sixth grade year into the seventh grade year, they asked a few students that they thought could handle the situation if they would go to be a part of this desegregation process. As you may have heard of Central High, that happened earlier. And after that, they started to uh, desegregate the other schools in the school system. And they would always bring in a few students every year. In my class, in the seventh grade, there were 3 boys and about 3 girls of color, of African American, and everyone else in the class was white. So I went through that and ended up going to Central High for high school. Um, so it was a smaller town and a very different kind of environment. And I had been through that race struggle, that civil rights struggle. I wanted to be a part of it, because I used to follow Martin and Malcolm, and I would listen to what everyone was saying. And my parents tried to talk me out of going to West Side Junior High School and I was like, no, 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 we got to show them, I'm going to do this. So when I get to Boston, I had a whole sort of different consciousness based on what I had gone through in my education up until that point. And I became aware of different ethnicities, even within the white culture, Polish kids, Italian kids, Jewish kids, you know, um, um, Latin, the whole thing. And where I was from, it's like you were black or you were white. It was. I didn't understand a lot of that, and then the cuisine, what people eat. There was some subtle differences. Because I had friends that were of West Indian descent, and they eat rice and peas, and they
Yeah.
showed me things, and their whole culture was a little different, and it was just a very different, fast paced. Um, um, it was just very different. Like, and Boston itself it was just very foreign to me. It took me a while to get acclimated to it and get adjusted to it. And the school itself, like I said, I didn't realize then as I do now, but I was a very conservative kid coming from the Bible Belt, you know, growing up, with people who were active churchgoers and involved in the church. And, you know, not that people weren't in Boston, but what I'm saying is it was just a different sort of climate, a lot of kids. I can remember one girl telling me, did you ever think of going to Howard? You might like it better there, because it was, people from Rhode Island and people from places that I wasn't familiar with. Like I had never known people from New York or people from DC or Providence, Rhode Island, or the Cape, or Cape Verdean. Well, and I remember one guy, I can't remember his name. He says, I'm talking to him and he says, I'm Cape Verdean. And I says, man, you're Black. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? You know, what are you talking about? You know? So all these little things, it took me a while to figure out and to say, okay, wow, this is really a kind of different place. Not to mention the weather, you know.
Mm-hmm. It's cold.
It gets cold. And it's not so much that it gets cold, it's that it stays cold so long. You know, you like, you know, March roll around, it's still cold, you know. April rolls around, it's still cold, you know. So that kind of threw me. So that was my initial reaction to it, you know. And then the school, it took me a while, like I say, to get adjusted to it, but I got in the flow and started to make my way through it. I hope that answered your question. I think
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Talked so long, I forget the question.
No, it's all good.
Trust me, it's engaging.
What am I talking about?
I guess my first question for you is, like, as you were talking earlier about, like, the first time you went on stage, you know, on 6th grade, and then you kind of felt that, okay, this is, you know, I enjoy doing this. This is something I want to do.
Right.
When you got, like, your first, well, at least noted, film role in, like, Brubaker.
Right.
Like, when you walked on the set, did you have that same feeling working there, or were you intimidated when you first?
No. I mean, it's really funny that you asked that question, because I can remember my first day on the set saying to myself, wow, here I am. I did it. I did it. You know what I mean? I felt a sense of satisfaction. Well, I felt that in I felt that on Brubaker, and I did a Broadway show. And the first time I did a Broadway show, I was walking to the theater, because people used to tease me when I was growing up in my neighborhood. They would go, I had a friend named Tony Dotson, and his mother, every time I would go by his house, his mother would say, hey, Tony, here comes the actor, you know, and stuff like that. Then she said, you gonna do commercials? I go, no, I'm not doing commercials. I'm gonna be a real actor, you know, so I'm a little kid, you know. And so I remember walking to the theater and saying, wow, man, here I am, you know. And I felt the same way on Brubaker. And the thing about Brubaker was, I was doing my second Broadway play called GR Point, and a buddy of mine came by to see the show, and we were closing, and he was telling me there was a film that was going to be shot that they were casting in town called Brubaker. And Brubaker was about a prison in Little Rock, in Arkansas. Oh. And it was about these bodies that were found in this open field. And they were bodies that had been secretly buried, of men who had been murdered while they were prisoners in captivity at Cummins, I think it was, prison farm. And growing up, I heard about that case. I knew one of the guys whose body was found in that case. So when he told me about it and who the casting director was and where she was, I said to myself, I'm going to take a picture and resume over. At that time, I didn't have a theatrical agent. At that time in New York, you could sort of make your way. You were doing what they call freelancing. You had 3 or 4 agents, and they would call you whoever gets to you first. And then you also could hustle work yourself, you know, through people you knew, people you work with. So anyway, I took a picture and resume, and I wrote on the resume, hey, I'm from Arkansas. I know this story. I need to be in this movie. And the casting director called me up, and I went in and talked to her, and we had a great meeting. And that's how I ended up on the set of Brubaker. And so there were a lot of different things going on, because it was so ironic to me that the first film I would ever do would be based on a story that happened in my home state that I was uh, aware of and had, witnessed as a kid growing up, had heard about. And like I said, I knew a guy who went down there and disappeared, vanished, and for that very reason.
Wow.
Because again, it goes back to what you were saying, like something in your life, it seemed to fit all together and come together.
Right. Yeah.
So I also have a follow-up question when it comes to that. Like, even though like, early in your career, you're an African-American Black actor, and, you're still, trying to get work where you can.
Right.
Were there any like roles where, even considering it was the 1980s, were there any like roles or scripts you got where you were just like, I can't play this. This is too stereotypical.
Yeah. There were things like that would come up. I'm trying to think of one, if there was one I can think of that specifically, but I did pass up. You have to be willing to say no. And there are things that I would pass on. For those reasons that you're talking about. But then a lot of times, you look at what is it that you can do with the role that can make it a little different than what the people casting it might think it is. But yeah, I was always looking for something. You're looking for something that you can express yourself in a way that that you want to, and that is positive. I'm trying to think of if there's something that I can really think of, but I can't, because because I am such a character actor. I would get really extreme people, real characters, nowhere near a leading man type guy. So when I would get something that has some sustenance to it, that's the other flip side of that coin. I would really jump on it. Like I remember a part just comes to mind, like for instance, Life, the movie Life, and I played Hoppin' Bob, who would be considered a stereotypical character, because he's like the Uncle Tom guy who's a trustee at the prison camp. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the movie.
I saw it in the theater the day it came out.
Same here.
Is what?
I actually saw that in the theater instead of seeing The Matrix. True story.
Yeah, but sometimes I learned how to do things to make things my own. For instance, like on that film, I met the director. I never really read for the role. I met the director. I was sent in to meet him, and we kind of clicked. He gave me the script and asked me to read it and to come back and talk to him about it. Now, as I'm hearing about other guys, as you know, that movie was loaded with talent. And so you're hearing about these guys that are getting parts going into the movie. So I'm reading this script, and you start to look for yourself in the story. What would be good for me? What part? And then I realized, oh, this guy wants me to play Hoppin' Bob. I bet you he's gonna ask me that based on what I look like, what he's got, whatever. So he's gonna want me to play that. So I go in and I meet with him and we're talking. And I said, I think I know what you want me to play, and he's Hoppin' Bob. I said, yeah, I figured that, I said, well, look, I would play it on one condition. You have to promise me one thing. And I know you're not going to want to put it in a contract, so we're going to have to just shake on it, But there was a scene where Biscuit was going to escape. He was just going to walk off the grounds of the prison, and the rule was that if a trustee shot a guy who was escaping, he'd get his freedom, So in that scene, my character was supposed to shoot him in the back as he's walking off. Now I knew that I saw the comedy in it, the bittersweet sort of tone of the movie. It wasn't like Django, for instance. You know, if you look at Sam's character in Django, it's a different film, different tone. So I says to him, I said, I'll play this if you promise me that I raise my gun to shoot this guy and I change my mind. I can't do it. And I let my gun come down and the guy from the tower hits him.
Mm.
And he said, okay, you got a deal. And then we did it that way. And that for me made Hoppin' Bob someone else.
Yes.
It made him a part of the guys. It made him just a guy getting over, wanting to eat better than everybody else, wanting to sleep better than everybody, wanted better accommodate, whatever. But he wasn't a killer in that sense. Because he did have some camaraderie with these guys that he was guarding. He was just a mouth, So.
Well, yeah, it definitely gives your character one of the more humane moments in the film.
Right. And so things like that you also have to look for. It's like, okay, what can I do with this? That makes it. And that same director ended up casting me in A Lesson Before Dying with Don Cheadle and the late Cicely Tyson, where I played the minister in that. And that was a great role. I mean, it was and I understood that character because it was set in the Delta, and it was set like maybe in the 40s, 1948 or something like that. And it was about this kid who was wrongly convicted of murder because he was with some kids who held up a little convenience store, and someone was killed, and was about his dignity. And I was the preacher who was trying to make sure he was accepting, God, and he was right on that score. And the conflict between me and Don Cheadle, who was the teacher, who was, so, and I can remember the director sitting off saying things like, wow, about my performance as I'm shooting it, saying, I didn't know the preacher was that smart. I didn't know that, so I brought out things in the character, even though he was an unschooled man. I was able to bring things out that they didn't expect to be there, So you look for those kinds of opportunities as well, You look for ways that you can enhance something, and make it what it is that they sometimes don't even know,
I want to circle back to Life for a second because, as you mentioned, that movie had a huge all-star cast. I mean, Eddie Murphy, Martin Lawrence, the late Bernie Mac, Miguel Nunez. I mean, you had like every black face in that film.
Yeah.
What was that set like behind the scenes? Because I heard like Eddie Murphy talk about Harlem Nights, how the stuff going on behind the scenes with him and Pryor and the rest of them was funnier than what was on the film.
It was like that to some degree on Life. I mean, I can remember you mentioned Bernie Mac, and Bernie Mac, I think, was working out his next job. You have your trailer, you have where you're supposed to hang out, and a lot of us used to hang out in his trailer because he would be working out his material for his TV show that he ended up doing, the Bernie Mac show. So he would be telling us these funny stories about taking care of his kids. He ended up, the uncle and aunt ended up being they were in charge of the child care of raising their nieces and nephews because of some family event. I'm not quite sure, remember what it was, but he had a lot of comedy that he was telling about that experience, and it was almost like he was working something out that he was going to use later on stage, and then when his show came out, I was like, oh yeah, that's what he was doing. He was working through that, writing it and working on it as he was shooting Life. So a lot of us spent a lot of time listening to Bernie's stories about raising his kids, his nieces and nephews, which became his TV show. And it was just a fun set because there were so many talented guys on it. You know, Eddie was a guy who, while we were shooting, who would entertain us with his impressions. And, you know, I used to think the guy was possessed with different spirits because he could sound like somebody totally different. You know, you say, how does that voice come out of him? How does that, you know, I mean, he has so much talent, and for the most part, we don't really see all of it in every film that he does. You know, you know, very rarely do you see the full breadth of how talented that guy is. You know, and he was a very collaborative guy. I mean, there were a couple of lines I can remember. We would be working on a scene. He would say, "Hey, try this line. I think this will work here." He'd give me stuff. You know, so. It was just fun. I mean, I have a picture of all of us with Anthony Anderson. It was his first film.
Yeah.
And so he was like, you know, like, what next? What next? What next? You know, he was gung ho and full of enthusiasm. And there's a picture of Bernie Mac, Anthony, myself, looking over the director's shoulders at the monitor, laughing at a scene that we had just shot. So we were enjoying it as we were going along, you know. Those were good days, man. You know, those were good days, and it was easy in those days. You know, everything's a little bit more difficult now with COVID and, you know, all kinds of restrictions and, you know, hoops that you have to jump through. But it was really fun, you know. And everyone got along. Everyone really invested in what we were doing. It was just fun. It really was. It was fun.
That's awesome.
It was one of those projects that I was saying that sometimes you go, yeah, this is what I dreamed of as a kid. This is what I dreamed of in terms of a way to make a living. You know, it's a real blessing to be able to. My mother used to always say to me, we used to talk, you know, and she would say, "This acting thing, you need to let this thing go. You know, you're reasonably smart. You know, you're wasting your mind. You're wasting your mind. You should be a doctor or a lawyer." And she would say, "Now, Brent, you can't beat work. You just don't want to work, you know." And I would say, you know, look, I just want to do something I enjoy doing. I want to spend my life pursuing something that I feel good about, you know, that I enjoy doing. I don't want to just work just to be working or to have a job, you know. And this has brought that to me, you know. It has fulfilled that, you know. And I think that's the reason a lot of people are in it. It's certainly the reason that I have stayed with it, you know.
Absolutely.
Definitely. I have a very long-winded question, so bear with me.
Okay.
I noticed, you know, obviously growing up watching you on the several television shows, you guest starred a lot, but I noticed like certain, you know, of course you have your guest starring roles where it's like only one episode, but then there were certain series where you were on multiple episodes, like Brooklyn Bridge, where I figure you got to build the character each episode. But when it came to something like, let's say, Miami Vice, where you're guest star 3 times, and each time it's a different character, did you enjoy that more because you got to invest in, you know, different characterizations, you had a little more room to play with, or did you prefer, like, coming back, you know, being known to everybody, being like, okay, he's playing this, whereas now on Miami Vice, you're like, I'm here this week, then I'm over here this week, then I'm here this week. Which one would you say you found more enjoyable and fulfilling as an actor?
But, you know, actors love to act. Actors love having a job. So I would say the recurring roles, which is what you were talking about when you mentioned where, you know, you saw me on Brooklyn Bridge. I don't remember how many I did, but, you know, the character comes back and he grows, you know, or like I just finished, I've just finished working on All American, where I've done about 13 or 14 episodes, and there's an evolution to the character, there's an arc, so he ends up totally different in the end. Well, it may be the end. I hope it's not the end, but in the last episode that I'm seeing in, he's totally different than the first time you see him. He really grows. So that's fun. The thing that makes the Miami Vice thing, and I had a similar thing with Hill Street Blues. The thing that makes those nice is that it's very rare that you end up on the same show more than once as a guest star in the life of that show, because they're very careful about making sure the audience doesn't recognize who's on the show from another show. They want everyone to be fresh and first seen in the role that they're first seen in. You know what I'm saying? They don't want the audience confused about anybody, So it's very rare that when you do a guest star, you call back to do another role. It happened to me on Hill Street, I think, because by the time I got to New York, the show was almost over, and they had used a lot of actors, and it was that very reason that I ended up doing 2 episodes in the same season, but they did a lot to try to make me up so people would recognize it was the guy from the earlier in the season, But the unique thing about Miami Vice was that they did the pilot, and then I did the first episode of the show. And then I come back in the middle and do of the run of the life of the show. I do an episode, and then I do an episode at the end. And so it was like, I couldn't believe it when I really thought about it. Like that was unusual, And each time, I think it was a director who brought me in, for the episode, So they sort of abandoned their own rule in that case, So I enjoyed it because I knew that it was a novelty. It doesn't happen very often, and I looked at it as a badge of honor.
It definitely.
Yeah.
So I think the first time for me, and I don't know for Jeff, but the first time that I took notice of you as an actor was in Witness with Harrison Ford playing his partner. And I remember like the desperation when he gets shot and he's trying to hide the Amish kid and you're trying to like make sure the corrupt cops don't find him. So this is actually like a 3-part question, but what was it like work with Harrison Ford and director Peter Weir? And I guess the third question I have is, did they shoot your death scene, or was it always intended to be off screen?
That's a good question. That's a good question. Okay. Harrison Ford had been doing Indiana Jones. What else had he done?
Star Wars.
Star Wars, that's what it was. So he was known for that stuff. And when I met him and worked with him, he was trying to shake that image and become a more kind of mainstream film persona, So it was John Book, the detective in Witness, big city, Philadelphia detective, something very different than Star Wars and Indiana Jones. So he was changing gears with his career with Witness. So everything that happened on set was very important to him, So because it was a important transition that he was making. So working him was interesting to watch him go through that process. And he was very involved. I had to meet with him like 4 times before getting the part. So the part was originally written as like a big guy. He was a ex-pro football offensive tackle, So yeah, so that's why I had to meet with Harrison so much, because the concept of the character was like, a bodyguard for John Book, as opposed to this little guy, And Peter Weir really kind of just fell in love with my work with some quality that I brought to the film that he really appreciated and that he liked having in the movie. And working with Peter Weir was really great. It was like taking a course in a grad program, watching him work on set, the choices he made. And we were having this discussion all along in the filmmaking process about whether or not my character, because Peter was always, the initial title of the movie was called Home. Why, I don't know. And Peter was rewriting the script as we shot it. So the question that he and I kept asking ourselves was, how would my character be killed on screen? How, we were trying to figure out that for some reason. I'm trying to think of Carter, that was my character's name, if it was written in the script that he was killed on screen. But we were having that discussion, director, actor, about my character. So we were shooting a scene. This is after the character Harrison plays, John Book, after it's known that he has gone into hiding, and the guy, I'm trying to remember the police chief's name, but I can't.
It was Schaefer.
Yeah, Schaefer. Schaefer's looking for him. Where is he? And he calls me into his office, and there's this scene where he's trying to get information from me about John Book. Now, when we were shooting this scene, Schaefer has lines and I have lines. He has lines, I have lines. And after a while we were rehearsing it, I said to Peter, I don't think this scene is working. I don't think it's going anywhere. Why don't we take my lines away and just let him talk to me, Schaefer, trying to find out where Book is, and I don't say anything, I just listen. So that's what we did. I didn't say anything. I took my lines out of the scene, and Schaefer just started saying all of his lines and moving around me as he was talking to me. And Peter looked at it and said, I like it. So all I did was react to Schaefer. All I did was listen to him and react. And then Peter says to me, well, first he says, you're the first actor I ever worked with who threw away his lines, who didn't want to keep his lines. And he says, I think we have an answer now. We're not going to have a death scene. Now we know you're a dead man. And so that all happened just because we started improvising with the scene that wasn't working. And I said, well, maybe it'll work better without lines. And that's how that happened. That's how that scene came to be.
Yeah, I actually now remember that scene, how intimidating that was.
Yeah.
So I also want to jump to Serpent and the Rainbow, because that also was a significant part that you played. And not only do I want to ask you about like working with Wes Craven, but how did you practice the Haitian accent? And was there like any feeling of being part of a cast that included people like Paul Winfield and Zakes Moe and Kathy Tyson?
Mm-hmm. So what was your question? What's it like?
Working with Wes Craven and more particularly like getting that Haitian accent for your character.
Yeah, that was a lady from New York University. I'm trying to remember her name. She was my dialect coach, and I started working with her before we even started working on the movie. And she would be on the set. She was well known as a dialect coach. I can't think of her name right now. Man, and she was a really, really nice lady too. Oh man, what was her name? I'd have to go back and look that up. But that was one of those unique experiences. I can't think of her name, but she was a teacher at New York University, a dialect coach, and I just had an ear for it. You know, in fact, at one point, they asked me to cut back on it, and it was too heavy because I fell into it and just kind of enjoyed doing it for a while. You know, it was a fun dialect to do. I wish I could remember some of the lines.
I remember the part with you and Bo Pullman on the plane, and you kind of like get him to give him his watch too. Yeah,
right. It was like you. It was the watch. I take the watch from him.
Yeah.
You know. Oh man, I can't think. I'm trying to Google it now. You know. Oh man, you too. And the scene when you first meet the character, when I'm in the cock ring, you know, with the cockfight, and you know, this is you know, I put a spell on you, you know. I can't remember the lines, but you asked me to go way back, you know. Gosh, I'm trying to find out the name of the dialect coach.
I'm sure it's on IMDb somewhere.
Yeah.
Yes.
What were you guys trying to do? Trying to get me to say something to do the accent?
No. I was just curious about like getting into that character.
Wow.
I mean, we can jump to another question if you
Yeah,
want.
let's do that. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do another question.
Yeah. So you worked with Walter Hill twice. You worked with him on Red Heat and in Another 48 Hours. Now, I'll leave the Another 48 Hours stuff to Jeff, but particularly the character you played in Red Heat, who's in prison, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jim Belushi come to you for info on the bad guys' whereabouts. That was, and I was thinking about it last night because I was rewatching that scene, and I feel like that was the first time Schwarzenegger had to deal with somebody that wasn't intimidated by him. Like you really like gave him some, you know, some poop. You know, you were not scared of him. So, what was that like working with him in that scene? And did it hurt wearing those contacts to be blind?
Yeah, it was like your vision was foggy. It was like looking through a fog, you know, and but at the same time, I really liked playing with what they did for me as the character, you know, because they built a ramp for me to walk on to raise my height.
I was going to ask.
so that I could look Schwarzenegger in the eye, you know, and they cut a lot of that scene out. Actually, you know, they just cut it down to the bare minimum almost, because there was a lot of things that he had to do before I would even talk to him. He had to beat up certain guys, you know. He had to pass certain tests, you know, before he could speak with me. But they cut all of that. It made sense to do that. But I remember talking to Walter about the scene, and when we were talking about it, he said, think of what if Miles Davis was doing this? You know, think of it as a musician, you know. And I was like, great. And then the things that I was saying is like, you know, I'm a holy man. I don't need testicles, and you know, I'm going to sell drugs to every white woman in America, stuff like that. I said, so Walter, you know what you're saying here, all right? You really want me to do this the way it would be done? You really want to go there? And he goes, yeah. I said, okay, all right, okay. So that's what we went for. We went for that real killer instinct, you know, and that real guy who says that, you know, and that was our discussion about that, you know, and I could see the effect of it Schwarzenegger as we were doing it, because, you know, it was not a pretty image, you know, that my character is painting, you know, to anyone who's a cop, you know, which he was, a Russian cop, but, you know, a cop. And so it was fun to play. It was fun to play that a guy with that kind of power who was basking in it and comfortable in it, and really sure of himself, even though he was locked behind bars.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Well, since I was assigned another 48 hours out of nowhere, I will admit, confession, watching that movie, I think that's the only role you've ever done where I didn't exactly recognize you the first time I watched it and saw you on screen. Because I was like, I see Brent Jennings is in the cast, but I'm watching the movie. I'm like, where?
Really?
Like on the second viewing, I was like, oh, how can I miss him? But I guess
compliment. I take that as a compliment.
You're very welcome. This is also, I guess, a multifaceted question again. Sorry if we keep throwing all these complicated, layered ones. I guess my first question is, like, on that film, as an actor, I know, you're playing the character, but when you're on a film set like that, is it more focused on you doing, like, let's say, the action or physicality of the stunts in the scene, or more just maintaining character no matter what?
Well, I think it's more the second, because you do have stunt guys who are going to do the heavy stuff for you.
Mm-hmm.
You know? So for me, it's more maintaining character and really just fulfilling out those obligations, Mm-hmm. And that was a role that grew and grew as I was on the movie, because Walter kept writing new scenes for the guy and putting me in them, So it grew, and which was nice, but it started out being like, I remember my agent saying, why you want to do this part? It's just a little part. But Walter had cast me in Red Heat, and we got along, and I just like, well, I'm just doing it, and he kept, I didn't realize that he kept building the role. He kept writing for me until it became a memorable role, So yeah, you just really keep your eye on your characterization and tracking your guy through the film. And the hardest thing for me about it was this scene where I said, like, where I get my ear shot off or whatever. That was a hard scene to play, because to me, it was like something that was impossible. If you think about it in real life, you think about, like, well, how do you take a gun that size and you're standing across with somebody and you shoot him, and next thing you know, he's got blood coming. It's like that's not going to happen. You're going to either blow the side of his face off, or you're going to, you can't do that. Unless you put the gun right there. How do you do that? So I just remember kind of laughing about that to myself and saying, well, I'll just be a ridiculous guy in this ridiculous moment, So he comes up, he's laughing, that doesn't change the job, Billy Bob. You still got, what I mean? It's like it doesn't make any sense, just have fun with it and be over the top, As things like that, you got to figure out, okay, how am I going to play this scene and have any kind of reality at all when it's really kind of unreal,
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I was a little disappointed when they killed you off that abruptly, because I felt like the way you were dressed, the way you were coming off, like you were almost Eddie Murphy's doppelganger, like his twin in some way. And I kind of wanted to see a confrontation with you guys in the third act instead of with the bikers.
That would have been good, but I think that's what he was trying to avoid. I think he was trying to confuse the character, not confuse the audience, because I remember he said, I want you to wear these glasses. I said, oh, you want to make sure that people know it's not Eddie. So I think he was trying to keep them separate and really kind of mark who I was, so it wouldn't be confused with Eddie.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Exactly. Also, I guess at that point in your career, were you still auditioning, or were you at a status where they're like, oh, Brent Jennings, and like read?
Auditioning now, you know.
Oh, man.
but I do get offers too. You know, it's a mix.
Okay.
It's a mix. Some people call up and they say, "Hey, we want Brent. Is he available to do this?" You know, and you read it and you go, "Okay, I'll do it." You know, and then other things come up and your representatives say, "Hey, they're interested in you for this, but you have to read for it." And then sometimes you say, "Well, I don't want to read for that," you know, because I'm not, they ought to give this to me because I'm not interested in reading for it. And then you pass. And then the things that come up that, hey, they're interested in you, and you read it and you go, oh, I would like to do this. And they said, well, but you got to read for it. Well, okay, you know, and you go give it a shot because you want it, you know. So it comes in all different ways, you know, for guys, for me, you know. You know, I mean, Sam Jackson, Denzel, those guys, they're on a whole totally different level. You know, they are brand names. You know, they're like Wheaties and cornflakes. you know, you know, they're part of Americana. So you know, it's different. But I think at least. But yeah, yeah, you know, so it all mixes in, you know. But at least I'm at a position where I can just say, nah, you know, I don't want to read for that. I don't have to read for that, you know. And there's a lot of pleasure in that as well.
I can imagine.
Mhm.